It's December 21st, 1988, just a few days before Christmas. A bomb goes off on Pan Am Flight 103, and the wreckage comes raining down on a small, quiet town in Scotland. What started in that moment became one of the most complicated and, honestly, contentious criminal investigations in modern history. It's a story that, even now, all these decades later, refuses to give us any easy answers.
To really get this story, you have to start right there, on the ground. Picture a quiet evening. You've got residents like Shona Black Harkness just visiting friends, dropping off presents. And then, out of nowhere, this terrifying roar shatters everything. A force so violent, it felt like the world itself was just coming apart. It wasn't an earthquake, it wasn't a train, it was a jumbo jet falling out of the sky. The human cost was just staggering. 259 people on board that plane, passengers, crew, so many of them Americans just heading home for the holidays, they were all gone. And on the ground, as this fiery debris just tore through their town, 11 more people were killed in their own homes. 270 lives just extinguished in an instant. So in those first moments, it was just pure confusion and horror. People looked up and saw what they could only describe as a nuclear explosion, a gigantic fireball lighting up the night sky. And as they stepped outside their homes, this surreal, awful reality started to sink in. Now here's the first detail that was really chilling for investigators. There was no distress call. Nothing. The plane, this iconic jumbo jet called the Clipper made of the seas, was flying perfectly one moment, and the next, it just blinked off the radar. That silence, that was the first big sign that this was no simple mechanical failure. This was something else. What came next was an investigation on a scale that had really never been seen before. The quiet Scottish countryside was suddenly transformed into what one FBI agent would later call the largest crime scene in the history of the world. I mean, just try to wrap your head around that for a second. We're talking about an army of police, soldiers, and volunteers walking shoulder to shoulder across miles and miles of rugged countryside all the way out to the North Sea. For months, their entire mission was to collect every single non-natural object they could find, from huge chunks of the plane's body to the smallest, most personal items. And then, just a few days into that massive search, the forensic teams found it, the proof. It was explosive residue found on a twisted piece of metal from a cargo container. The idea of a bomb was no longer just a theory, it was a fact. And this case officially became a massive murder inquiry. But okay, so you know it's a bomb. Now what? How in the world do you find a killer from an explosion that happened at 31,000 feet? Well, the answer, incredibly, lay in a series of clues so small they could have easily been missed. Investigators followed a trail that honestly seems almost impossible. They painstakingly traced these tiny scraps of clothing they found in the wreckage all the way back to a single shop on the island of Malta. And there, the owner, a man named Tony Gauci, actually remembered selling those exact clothes to a man he thought was strange, a guy who bought a weird mix of items and didn't seem to care about the size or style. But you know, among all that debris, there was one piece of evidence that would change absolutely everything. A tiny fragment of a circuit board, smaller than your fingernail. It had been blasted with such incredible force that it was actually embedded into the collar of a shirt that was packed inside that bomb-filled suitcase. This wasn't just another clue. This was the key that could unlock the entire conspiracy. So that tiny fragment, it turned out to be the final link in the chain. It was matched to a very specific electronic timer made by a Swiss company. And when investigators checked that company's records, they found that a batch of those exact timers had been sold to only one client, the Libyan military. All of a sudden, the trail led directly to a nation-state. With Libya now as the prime suspect, the whole investigation shifted. It went from a forensic puzzle to this decade-long international standoff, basically a geopolitical chess match, with justice just hanging in the balance. And getting that justice, well, it was going to take years. Formal charges were laid out in 1991, but then a whole decade of sanctions and incredibly tense negotiations followed, before Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi, finally agreed in 1999 to hand over the two suspects for trial. The solution they came up with was a legal first. A totally special court was set up at a neutral site, a former U.S. base in the Netherlands. but it operated entirely under the Scottish legal system. It was this extraordinary compromise, really, designed to finally let the victims' families see the accused face their day in court. So, after a trial that went on for months, the verdict came in and it was a split decision. Abdelbaset al-Megrahi was found guilty, but his alleged partner in crime, Lamin Khalifa Fima, was acquitted, found not guilty. And for a lot of people, this raised a huge question right away. If these two were supposed to have worked together, how could only one of them be guilty? So far from closing the book on Lockerbie, that verdict actually opened a brand new chapter. A chapter filled with doubt, division, and this persistent search for a truth that many people felt was still buried somewhere. One of the most prominent voices of this new doubt was Dr. Jim Swire, who lost his daughter Flora on that flight. Here's a man who at first just wanted justice, but he eventually became one of the conviction's most vocal critics because he truly believed the full story had not been told. So what were these doubts all about? Well, the key witness, that shopkeeper in Malta, it came out that he was far less certain in his identification than the court had been led to believe. And even more critically, the owner of the Swiss company that made the timer later retracted his statement. He claimed the fragment that was found was not from a timer his company had sold to Libya. But this is far from a simple, one-sided debate. Other groups of victims' families strongly oppose this perspective. They remain absolutely convinced of Megrahi's guilt. And this has created a really painful and very public division among the people who all shared the same terrible loss. And the story just keeps evolving, even to this day. You know, Libya accepted responsibility and paid billions in compensation, though some argue that was just a political move to get sanctions lifted. Megrahi was later released from prison and died a few years later. And as recently as 2020, the U.S. charged a third man, the alleged bomb maker, which keeps this case alive for a whole new generation. Which really just leaves us with this one final question. For the families, 4 decades have passed. That's a lifetime of grief, a lifetime shaped by searching for answers. And in the Lockerbie case, it seems it's a search that may never, ever truly be over.